There exists a decisive breaking point when loyalty transforms into complicity, when silence hardens into betrayal, when the delicate architecture of family devotion finally collapses under the unbearable weight of truth itself. Princess Beatrice crossed that threshold not with words or declarations, but with an act of surgical erasure so profound it still reverberates through the corridors of Windsor. Imagine for a moment the psychological violence required to open your own wedding album, the photographs that should represent the purest joy of your existence, and methodically remove your father from every frame, not with anger, not with dramatic ceremony, but with the cold, clinical precision of someone performing an amputation to save what remains of the living body. She wielded that scalpel herself, carving him out of her documented history, as if he were a malignant growth rather than the man who raised her, who walked beside her down that aisle, who once represented everything a father should symbolize. But this wasn't merely about protecting a public image, or salvaging a reputation already shattered beyond recognition. No. What Beatrice understood, what kept her awake in those silent Norfolk nights, was that something far more catastrophic was building momentum behind the ancient walls of the monarchy itself. A reckoning so devastating, it threatened not just her father's legacy, but the entire structural integrity of the institution her family had served for generations. While the world fixated on tabloid scandals and surface-level disgrace, a much darker machinery was grinding forward, processing evidence, unsealing documents, connecting threads that had been deliberately tangled for decades. Was Beatrice simply an unfortunate casualty of her father's spectacular self-destruction, an innocent daughter caught in the blast radius of choices she never made? Or did her own actions, her careful negotiations, her strategic interventions, her whispered warnings to her sister, actually accelerate the very catastrophe she was desperately trying to prevent? The stakes have never been higher, the consequences never more irreversible. Because on February 19, 2026, the shadow that had been lurking in exile finally materialized into handcuffs and interrogation rooms when Prince Andrew was arrested in Norfolk and dragged from his sanctuary in the dead of night. The so-called Shadow King, the prince who once embodied untouchable royal privilege, was finally, officially, undeniably brought to ground. But everything we think we know about Andrew's downfall, everything we've been told about Beatrice and Eugenie's precarious position within this disintegrating family structure, is about to fracture completely. Because Beatrice is still concealing something, a secret so volatile it's been locked away in sealed files. The palace prayed wouldn't surface until 2076, a full 50 years after the investigation began. Today, that silence is ending, and we have the proof. February 19, 2026, should have unfolded as a quiet, perhaps melancholy occasion, marking the 66th birthday of Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, in the secluded refuge of Wood Farm, that isolated cottage tucked deep within the sprawling Sandringham estate where disgraced royals are sent to fade from public memory. The Norfolk countryside should have offered him peace, anonymity, the gift of being forgotten. Instead, that tranquil morning was shattered not by celebration, but by the ominous approach of unmarked police vehicles, their presence a stark and terrifying declaration that the era of protection had definitively ended. Plainclothes officers assembled outside the gates while inside, Andrew was read his rights, his hands gripping not birthday candles but the cold, unforgiving reality of his new status as a criminal suspect. This wasn't recycled gossip or sensational tabloid speculation designed to sell papers. This was official. Andrew was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office, now formally implicated in a criminal investigation directly connected to the unsealed Epstein files, those 3 million pages of documentation that were supposed to remain classified, buried, inaccessible until long after everyone involved had died. Just months earlier, he'd already suffered the devastating humiliation of losing every military title, every honorary appointment, every ceremonial privilege that had defined his identity within the royal apparatus. Now this, for Beatrice, watching from a distance yet feeling every bone in her bones, the illusion she'd fought so desperately to maintain, that fragile bubble of protective isolation, had finally irreversibly burst. But the real degradation was only beginning. The 11-hour interrogation that followed at Isham Police Station wasn't merely questioning. It was the systematic dismantling of a life that had once existed in a sphere beyond accountability, a brutal demonstration that royal blood no longer functioned as a shield against the machinery of justice. While Andrew endured that interrogation, a parallel drama of eviction and desperation unfolded at Royal Lodge, the massive 30-room mansion where he and Sarah Ferguson had resided for 20 years, that last bastion of their former grandeur. King Charles, whose patience had apparently been limitless for far too long, had finally reached an absolute non-negotiable breaking point. The whispers filtering out from palace insiders described not a dignified legal process, but something closer to a violent purge, a scorched earth elimination of every trace of Andrew's presence within the royal properties. Even more shocking was Sarah Ferguson's abrupt vanishing act. After decades as a seemingly permanent fixture within Windsor circles, she disappeared like smoke, becoming a ghost haunting the edges of aristocratic Europe. Sources report she's now living a nomadic existence, dependent on the temporary hospitality of wealthy former connections scattered across the continent, sleeping in guest rooms of people who once courted her favor, now reduced to accepting their charity. The loss of Royal Lodge wasn't merely architectural. It symbolized a deeper, more fundamental rupture tearing through the York family's foundation. Rumors suggest Andrew and Sarah's relationship, which had survived divorce and scandal and public humiliation for years, has finally collapsed into a terrifying silence, with each fleeing in opposite directions to escape the legal inferno consuming everything they'd built. As her parents scattered like embers from a dying fire, Beatrice was left alone to salvage the charred remnants of an inheritance that was rapidly becoming more liability than legacy. But the most chilling revelation emerged from the day of Andrew's arrest itself. A professional lip reader, analyzing private footage captured by telephoto lenses, managed to decode a whispered conversation between Beatrice and her sister Eugenie. The warning Beatrice delivered was stark and eerily prophetic. "It will get harder, he won't follow the rules." What rules was she referencing? What additional catastrophe did she foresee that would make an already nightmarish situation even worse? And what dark secret might Andrew still be concealing? Something so dangerous it could drag his daughters deeper into an abyss from which there would be no escape. To answer that question, we need to examine a specific fateful encounter that Beatrice herself helped arrange. A meeting she facilitated with the best of intentions that would ultimately become the instrument of her father's complete and total destruction. Sometimes the person you love most desperately is precisely the one who places you in the greatest danger. And in this devastating narrative, that person was Princess Beatrice herself, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's own daughter. In November 2019, as the BBC circled with increasing aggression, preparing to finally corner the evasive prince, a secret meeting was orchestrated that would permanently alter the trajectory, not just of Andrew's life but of the entire monarchy's public standing. What made this particularly tragic was Beatrice's role, not as a passive observer, but as an active architect of the encounter. Producers later revealed she was the crucial facilitator, the rainmaker, the only person with sufficient influence to convince a delusional, isolated man to step directly into the flames of public scrutiny. She genuinely believed she was creating an opportunity for her father to clear his name, to reclaim some measure of dignity, to tell his side of a story that had been twisted and sensationalized by media outlets hungry for scandal. In reality, she was handing him the shovel, with which he would dig his own grave with horrifying efficiency. The consequences were instantaneous and absolutely catastrophic. As the entire world watched in a mixture of disbelief and secondhand embarrassment, Andrew delivered what would become his most infamous statements, assertions so bizarre they would be repeated and mocked for years to come. He claimed he physically could not sweat due to an adrenaline overdose suffered during the Falklands War. He offered as an alibi a visit to Pizza Express in Woking, a detail so mundane and specific it seemed designed to be verifiable yet felt completely absurd in context. Within hours, the internet erupted in a firestorm of ridicule, memes proliferating across every social platform, comedians crafting entire routines around his bizarre defenses. But behind the public spectacle, behind the mockery and the viral clips, the destruction was far more personal and far more complete. Beatrice had to confront the heartbreaking realization that the interview she had championed, the platform she had meticulously constructed believing it would save her father, had instead become the stage for his absolute annihilation. This wasn't the kind of regret that fades with time or softens with perspective. People close to the family report that she spent years mentally replaying those conversations, tormented by the agonizing question of whether a single no, one moment of resistance might have prevented the total collapse that followed. But by 2026, even the catastrophic BBC interview had been eclipsed by a new and far more dangerous reality revealed through the unsealed Epstein files. The exposure now extended far beyond an embarrassing television appearance into territory that touched national security itself. Fresh evidence suggested that Andrew, during his tenure as UK trade ambassador, may have been passing confidential government documents directly to Jeffrey Epstein, not casual information or public knowledge but high-level classified intelligence. These included sensitive materials regarding potential investments in Afghanistan, documents containing strategic details that were never intended for private distribution, let alone for the eyes of a convicted financial criminal with shadowy international connections. This was no longer simply a matter of social embarrassment or damaged reputation. This represented a potential breach of national security protocols, a betrayal that transcended family drama and entered the realm of genuine criminal liability. King Charles's response was glacial in its swiftness and absolute in its finality. Rather than mounting any defense or attempting to shield his brother from consequences, he effectively authorized the harsh 11-hour interrogation conducted on Andrew's 66th birthday, a date that should have offered at least symbolic protection, but instead became the occasion for his formal processing as a criminal suspect. This was calculated familial abandonment, a clear public signal that the crown would no longer serve as sanctuary for the disgraced prince. Yet while police methodically searched Wood Farm's grounds and interrogators pressed Andrew for answers he seemed constitutionally incapable of providing, Beatrice was engaged in her own frantic maneuvering. She was observed speaking in hushed, urgent tones with her sister Eugenie, and once again professional lip readers managed to decode fragments of their exchange. This time, the instruction was even more alarming. You need to be out of the country when the next wave hits. What wave was she anticipating? Was she simply protecting her younger sister from the crushing media scrutiny that would inevitably intensify, or was she warning Eugenie about something far more sinister, something buried deep within those 3 million pages of unsealed documentation that could implicate them more directly than anyone yet understood? The answer, we're discovering, is hidden within a covert financial trail that leads directly back to what should have been the happiest day of Beatrice's life, a day that instead became an exercise in erasure and grief. Imagine your wedding day. That singular moment when everyone who loves you gathers to witness your joy, to celebrate the beginning of your new life, to capture memories you'll treasure forever. Now imagine that in order to preserve any fragment of that happiness, any possibility of public dignity, you had to surgically remove your own father from those memories, to erase him from the photographic record as if he had never existed, as if he were a stain rather than the man who raised you. The ceremonial erasure that Beatrice endured would have psychologically destroyed most people. In July 2020, when she finally married Eduardo Mapelli Mozzi, there was no grand royal spectacle, no public celebration befitting a princess of her lineage. The lavish ceremony originally planned was abandoned in favor of a quiet, almost furtive affair with just 20 guests at Royal Chapel of All Saints, held under conditions of such secrecy it felt more like a witness protection arrangement than a wedding. But the reduced guest list wasn't the most painful alteration. When official photographs were eventually carefully released to the public after weeks of deliberation and strategic editing, one figure was conspicuously, painfully absent. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the man who had walked his daughter down the aisle, had been completely removed from the visual record. His existence had been sanitized from Beatrice's own history, erased with the precision of a state censor, eliminating a disgraced official from archival photographs. The message from the palace fortress was unmistakable and cold. In order to protect Beatrice, in order to preserve whatever remained of the monarchy's already severely damaged reputation, Andrew had to become a non-person, expunged from even his daughter's most intimate moments. But as the investigations intensified throughout 2026, we discovered that the calculations behind that wedding day erasure were motivated by something far more complex than simply avoiding a public relations disaster. The sanitization was tactical, part of a larger pattern of concealment, related to a secret financial trail that had been carefully hidden for years. According to explosive new allegations emerging from the released Epstein archives, the extraordinarily lavish lifestyle that Princess Beatrice and Eugenie have maintained for decades may have been funded not through legitimate royal inheritance or their own professional earnings, but through sources with deeply troubling connections. Documents reveal millions in untraceable financial transactions, some allegedly linked to Sarah Ferguson's documented role as a strategic advisor within Epstein's network, a position that went far beyond casual social acquaintance into active professional collaboration. The most disturbing revelation centers on a specific incident from 2009, a lunch meeting in Miami that occurred just days after Epstein's release from his initial prison sentence. Sarah Ferguson allegedly brought her teenage daughters, Eugenie and Beatrice, both minors at the time, to dine with the recently convicted banker, a meeting facilitated by Epstein himself, who paid over $14,000 for their private flight. For years, Beatrice remained either genuinely ignorant or willfully blind to the depth and darkness of her parents' entanglement with Epstein's world. But by 2026, that protective barrier of plausible deniability had been completely demolished. In a decisive and humiliating move, King Charles formally terminated Andrew's annual $1 million allowance, leaving the disgraced prince effectively bankrupt and entirely dependent on whatever financial support his daughters could or would provide. Meanwhile, Sarah Ferguson's nomadic lifestyle had descended from uncomfortable to genuinely desperate. Since her forced expulsion from Royal Lodge, she's been reportedly spotted throughout Europe, in Zurich, in various Swiss mountain retreats, sleeping in the homes of wealthy former associates, frantically attempting to remain one step ahead of the expanding legal investigation consuming the United Kingdom. The York family, once seemingly unified despite divorce and scandal, had fragmented completely, with each member now desperately attempting to escape the blast radius of the 2026 investigation that seemed to expand daily, ensnaring more people, uncovering more connections, revealing more compromising details. Yet in the midst of her parents' frantic scattering, Beatrice was making the most dangerous calculation of all. As Andrew and Sarah fled in opposite directions, the princess was observed making repeated, increasingly desperate attempts to serve as intermediary between her father and the king, trying to negotiate some form of truce, some precarious peace agreement that might halt the complete disintegration of her family. But once again, lip readers analyzing carefully captured footage decoded a brief exchange between Beatrice and Eugenie that suggested she understood a ceasefire was no longer possible. She whispered with quiet intensity, "Remember, we're in this together." In any other context, this might sound like simple sisterly solidarity, the natural bonding of siblings facing shared adversity. But in the shadow of a criminal investigation in 2026, with prosecutors methodically building cases from those 3 million pages of unsealed files, it sounded less like comfort and more like a pact, a mutual agreement to maintain unified silence regardless of external pressure. What exactly were they in together? Was it merely emotional support, or something far more legally precarious? Is there a connection to the rumored nuclear tell-all memoir that Sarah Ferguson is allegedly attempting to sell to publishers for a staggering $20 million, a book that insiders claim would expose details the palace has fought desperately to keep buried? To understand the full truth, we need to examine the final desperate measures that unfolded behind the locked doors of that isolated Norfolk cottage in the hours before Andrew's arrest. The dawn of February 19, 2026, marked the official and irreversible end of an era when royal immunity, once considered an unassailable shield, was finally and definitively stripped away. As the sun rose over the Sandringham estate on what should have been a quiet birthday celebration, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was not preparing to receive gifts or well wishes from family. He was being escorted into the back of a police vehicle, his hands likely trembling, his world contracting to the dimensions of that back seat. This was not a polite private conversation arranged through lawyers and palace intermediaries. This was not a voluntary interview conducted in comfortable surroundings with tea and biscuits. This was a formal arrest on suspicion of misconduct in public office, a charge that carried genuine criminal penalties including potential imprisonment. He spent 11 grueling hours being interrogated by detectives at Isham Police Station, subjected to questioning that delved into secrets that had been meticulously protected, deliberately obscured, carefully managed for more than a decade. The central allegation was explosive and, if proven, utterly devastating, that during his service as a trade ambassador for the United Kingdom, a position of significant trust and access, he had been passing confidential government intelligence, information that could affect financial markets and international relations, directly to Jeffrey Epstein. The violation of trust was so severe, the potential damage to national security so profound, that King Charles didn't even attempt to provide cover or suggest extenuating circumstances. Instead, the palace issued a statement so cold it felt like a formal execution notice. The law must take its course. When Beatrice saw her father emerge from that police station after those 11 hours, his eyes hollow, his posture diminished, a ghost inhabiting the shell of a man who once radiated arrogant confidence, it was the most tangible manifestation of her worst nightmares made real. But while police diligently pursued their investigation in the present, a new financial nightmare was simultaneously erupting from the past. Andrew was now effectively a man without resources or refuge. His £1 million annual stipend had been formally cancelled. His private security detail disbanded, leaving him vulnerable and exposed in ways he'd never experienced in his entire privileged existence. The constant threat of eviction from Royal Lodge, which had loomed for months, suddenly crystallized into devastating reality. According to multiple sources, his personal belongings were being removed from the 30-room mansion even while he sat in that interrogation room, a forced and almost ceremonial purging of his presence from the property he'd considered home for 2 decades. Sarah Ferguson's nomadic lifestyle, meanwhile, had descended into something approaching genuine desperation, rather than mere inconvenience. Since her dramatic expulsion from the inner royal circle, she'd been spotted throughout Europe, allegedly dependent on the unstable generosity of wealthy acquaintances to maintain even a shadow of her former lifestyle. The York family, once a symbol of resilient unity despite divorce and public scandal, was now profoundly fractured, each member frantically attempting to escape the expanding blast radius of investigations that seemed to grow more encompassing with each passing week. Yet the most chilling evidence of the family's disintegration came once again from professional lip readers who meticulously analyzed camera footage capturing Beatrice and Eugenie during the chaos surrounding Andrew's arrest. In the midst of that turmoil, Beatrice leaned close to her sister and delivered a warning that sent Vunden through royal press rooms. "We can't stop what's coming," she whispered with terrible certainty. "You need to be overseas when the next wave hits." Was she referring to additional tranches of those 3 million unsealed pages that Crown prosecutors were still systematically reviewing? Or was she warning her sister about a potential sweep of arrests that could ensnare not just Andrew but others in his immediate family, including themselves? The wave she described might represent the final piece of evidence that explicitly connects the York family's most private financial arrangements to Epstein's sprawling network of influence, transactions that converted moral compromise into tangible wealth over the course of decades. Beatrice no longer possesses the protective silence she fought so desperately to maintain through strategic erasures and careful negotiations. All that remains now are the stark, unavoidable consequences. And as King Charles prepares for a crucial reputation-restoring tour, with particular focus on strengthening relationships with the United States, he has made one position terrifyingly clear: Princess Beatrice and Eugenie have no secure place in the streamlined, scandal-free monarchy he's determined to construct. What is the ultimate truth that Beatrice is still attempting to conceal, perhaps even from herself? And could Sarah Ferguson's rumored $20 million memoir be the final detonation that destroys whatever fragments of the York family still remain standing? The era of protective silence and survival through strategic invisibility is definitively over for Princess Beatrice and Eugenie, but the full story of their destruction, the accounting of consequences, and the revelation of their final impossible choices is far from complete. We will continue tracking the documents as they're unsealed. Those secrets the palace desperately hoped would remain buried until 2076, a full 50 years after the investigation began, long after everyone currently involved would be safely dead and beyond accountability. For more than a decade, Beatrice has served as the silent, obedient guardian of the York family's most dangerous secrets, the keeper of compromises and concealments that required constant vigilance. She mediated the disastrous interviews, standing loyally beside catastrophic decisions even when every instinct must have screamed warnings. She arranged crucial meetings that backfired spectacularly. She prepared her sister for confrontations that only grew more threatening with each revelation. But now, as King Charles moves methodically to formally remove her father from any remaining position in the line of succession, to eliminate even the theoretical possibility that Andrew could ever represent the crown in any capacity, Beatrice faces a choice that will define not just her immediate future, but her entire historical legacy, a decision whose implications will echo for the next 50 years and beyond. Will she remain the blindly loyal daughter, chained to a vessel that has already sunk to the ocean floor, dragged down by the weight of her father's choices and her own complicity in concealing them, or will she finally become the one who speaks, who breaks the terrible silence, who exposes uncomfortable truths in order to protect what remains of her own name and the future of her own children who will inherit whatever reputation she leaves behind? I want to hear your perspective on this because the answer isn't simple, and the moral calculations are genuinely complex. Do you believe Beatrice was truly unaware of the full depth and darkness of her father's entanglements, making her simply a tragic victim of circumstances she never chose and couldn't control? Or has she always been the calculating one, the strategic architect behind the family's last desperate attempts at survival, fully aware of the compromises being made, but choosing family loyalty over uncomfortable truth? And given that those fully sealed files won't be accessible to the public until 2076, do you genuinely believe we'll ever know the complete, unvarnished truth about what the York family knew, when they knew it, and what choices they made in response to that knowledge? Share your thoughts in the comments below because I read every single one, and your perspectives genuinely shape how we approach these investigations going forward. If this deep research into the evolving catastrophe consuming the royal family intrigues you, if you want to continue following these revelations as sealed documents surface and new evidence emerges, please click like and subscribe with alerts turned on so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next investigation as we continue methodically revealing the secrets that powerful institutions desperately want to keep buried forever.